Hi, I'm Bob Farkley, part of the Hifn BitWackr team in San Diego, California. And today I'd like to spend a few moments demonstrating to you the data reduction capability and performance of the Hifn BitWackr, our data deduplication and compression solution for Windows servers. Before creating the BitWackr drive that we're going to use in the demonstration, let's take a quick tour of the system resources available to us. I'll begin by right-clicking on Computer and selecting Properties, where you can see that we're running Windows Server Service Pack 2, and we're using a single dual-core Intel processor and 4 gigabytes of RAM. Closing this down, we can take a look at the disk configuration. We'll do that by looking at Windows Explorer and by opening Computer. There we can see that we have a C drive, which is located on the SSD, a D drive, which is our data that we're going to use to copy to the BitWackr volume. That's also located on a partition on the SSD. And then we have an E drive, which is just a data partition on the SATA drive. We're going to share that with the BitWackr volume. So closing that down, we can open up Server Manager, and we can look at the storage configuration by going to Disk Management. And we can see the two disks. Here's disk 0, which is our SATA drive where we're going to build the BitWackr volume, and disk 1, which is the SSD, which we're going to use as for the metadata files that the BitWackr uses. Closing this down, we'll double-click on the BitWackr icon in the system tray, and we'll click on Add Volume. When I click on Add Volume, I get a dialog that starts where I can add the name of the volume that I want to create, so I'll just call that BitWackr. And I've already checked, so I know my SATA drive, my data store drive, is disk 0. So I'm just going to leave that as disk 0. And then I'll fill in disk 1 as the disk number for my metadata files. And those are filled in here. And now I'm going to select drive G and assign that, have the BitWackr assign that to the BitWackr volume. So then I'll select OK, and this will begin building the BitWackr volume. This probably takes about 2 minutes, so we're going to do a little bit of a time lapse and come back when the volume is complete. So now our BitWackr volume has been completed, and clicking on the Capacity tab, we can see the BitWackr volume, which has been created as a 5 terabyte volume. And we have some statistics here that really don't mean a great deal at this point in time. We'll describe those in a little more detail as we go along. We can click on the Configuration tab, and again you'll see that we have a 5 terabyte virtual volume that we're using, and here's some information about the metadata storage. But that's not really the purpose of this demo. We're actually now going to take a look at the BitWackr volume itself, and by going back to Disk Manager, we can see that a new disk has been created, and that's the G drive that we use the user interface to create, and that's a 5 terabyte drive, and that's the drive we're going to examine and move data to and from. So by going now to the Windows Explorer, my BitWackr drive, and I'll open up our D drive, and I will copy this folder called test data. And to give you an idea what's in test data, we'll look at the properties of it, and you'll see that it is contains about 28 gigabytes of data, and I'm going to take that test data folder and copy it and paste it into the BitWackr G drive, and now the copy process will start. Now this is going to take a few minutes. According to Windows here, it may take several minutes, and we're going to do a time lapse on this as well. But one of the things I'd like to do is give you an idea of the data transfer that's taking place. You can see we're copying a large number of files, 23,000 odd files, and quite a bit of data. And by clicking down on the More Information tab, we can get an estimate of the data transfer rate of this copy operation that's taking place. So this is what Windows is reporting. We're transferring data from an SSD to a SATA drive, and you can see it's varying in the 20 to 30 to 35, 36 megabyte per second rate. So we're going to let that copy for a while, and then we'll come back in a few moments and continue the demonstration. Now, this copy operation gives you an idea of single stream performance using the BitWackr, but while that's important, it's also interesting to see what happens when you have more than one stream being transferred or copied at the same time. So let's take a look at a couple of directories. Here we have a VMDK file, which is about a 5 gig file. Let's make a copy of him to our BitWackr drive. And then we'll take a look at another VMDK file, which is about a 2 gig file. We'll copy him and also paste him to the BitWackr. So now we're going to have 3 data transfers going on simultaneously. And if I drop down the performance tabs on each of them, you'll be able to see what the aggregate data transfer performance looks like amongst these 3 different operations that are going on simultaneously. So we suspect that those are additive. So if you can add up those data transfers, you'll get an idea of the aggregate performance of our single BitWackr volume located on this computer. This should come to an end in just a moment. And what we're going to do following that is to check the directory contents and check the byte counts and check the folder counts and the file counts. And we're going to make sure that what we started with is what we ended up with on the BitWackr data reduce drive. So if I take a look at the test data folder on the D drive, which is the source drive, and I right click on that and I check its properties, we can see the byte count, the number of files, and the number of folders. And then if I go to the test data folder on my BitWackr G drive and I right click on that and I check its properties, I can compare the two, and you can see that the starting point and the finishing point are the same in terms of the number of bytes, which is what we would expect. So here's my D drive, here's my G drive, and as you see, we have exactly the same number of bytes, same number of files, and the same number of folders. So I have 2 batch files here that perform MD5 checksums on a file, one on the D drive, which is the source drive, and take a look at that. And I have another one that checks, does a checksum on the same file after it's been copied to the BitWackr drive, the G drive. So essentially the same thing. We're looking at the same file. We're looking at the one of the several gigabyte files that we moved from one drive to another. So let's first calculate the checksum on the original data, on the source data, and that'll take a moment to calculate. And then we'll look at the checksum on the destination drive, which is the BitWackr G drive, and we can take a look at that checksum, and if those match, then we know that we've preserved data integrity throughout the transfer. So we've looked at the number of files, the number of bytes, the number of folders, and now indeed we can look at the checksums and we see that those match as well. Thank you for your time and attention.